Hi, it's me, Jacqueline. Welcome to my channel. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to my channel and join me at Patreon. Link in the description. After a good 40 minutes, I sat back and looked at my handiwork. 3 coats of mascara was the answer, I said to myself. After blow-drying my hair, I managed to fix the ponytail without too much trouble. A quick brush, a spray of lacquer, and a pretty hair clip later, and I was finished. I went to the wardrobe and looked for the clothes Georgie had listed on the planner. I assumed she knew what items were in the wardrobe, and after a minute or two I found what I was looking for. The lingerie store bag, which contained the 2 corsets, was still by my bedside drawer. For a second I wondered if I should wear one of them today. I lifted the pink one out, then noticed all the lacing and fastenings. I thought I'd never manage that on my own, so from my lingerie drawer I selected a sheer lace firm control body shaper instead. I put it on, adjusted the straps. I decided to insert the upper part enhancers in the cups and then slipped a pair of flesh-colored hold-up stockings on my newly smooth legs. I picked up the skirt Georgie wanted me to wear. It was red with white polka dots. And it was rubber. Not the cheap variety, the very expensive type. I managed to pull it on and zipped up the back. If I thought the flight attendant skirt was tight, then this was even more so, as it finished a few inches below the knee. The jacket was a shade of powder blue and was also very fitted. Thankfully, it was not rubber, I thought to myself as I did up the front buttons. A pair of peep-toe, slingback heels were next, and a red/white handbag completed the outfit. The nameplate on the desk said Miss Jane Ashbridge, Employment Advisor. Jane Ashbridge was in her early 20s, but dressed as if she was much older. Frumpy sprung to mind. Since I'd first started claiming benefits, she was my advisor, but to date she had not found me suitable work. Her manner at times was intimidating, and she had an obvious dislike of me from day one. The look on her face now was priceless. She had not recognized me when I came in with Georgie, and she looked dumbstruck when she realized it was in fact me in the red skirt and heels. It must have been the sassy way I swung my hips that distracted her. As she prepared my paperwork, I teasingly crossed my legs, allowing the upper one to swing up and down in order to show off my heels. As she finished writing, she put the form in front of me and said, "If you just sign this declaration. And I'll need a forwarding address to send your tax documents to you." I took the pen from her and held it in my highly polished fingers. As I confirmed my intention to stop claiming, I could see her looking at me in a mixture of disbelief and shock. "There you are, Miss Ashbridge," I said softly and in my most womanly voice as I handed back the paperwork. She took it and checked it over. As she read, she spoke. "You say you're hoping to start full-time employment soon?" "Yes," I said. "I have an interview with Hannah Sadler Fashions this Saturday." Again, she was taken aback. I looked down at her shoes and noticed how plain they were in comparison to mine. "The fashion store?" she inquired. "Of course." Georgie leaned forward in her chair and broke her silence. "You have heard of it then? Sally is going to make a great sales assistant, you know. Perhaps she'll serve you one day." Miss Ashbridge did not know what to say. "Quite," was her reply. I allowed my lips to run over my made-up mouth. I was enjoying this and would never forget the expression on her usually smug face. We got up to leave, and I made a special effort to smooth out my skirt. Because it was rubber, my hands created a small squeaking sound, which I wanted Miss Ashbridge to notice. Back in Georgie's car, we both burst out laughing. "See, that wasn't so bad, was it?" Georgie said, wiping a tear from her eye. I nodded, and she started up the engine. "Now, let's get started," she said as we moved off towards the city center. I had still not been told what the day entailed, but assumed it meant spending the majority of it out and about. Perhaps she wanted to give me more experience outside as opposed to the classroom. As we drove, she started the conversation with, "Do you think you can be a complete woman if you don't fancy men?" This startled me. I was happy as Sally and loved the clothes and everything, but I did not fancy other men. Before I could think of an answer, she spoke again. "Oh, don't worry, Sally. I'm not taking you out man hunting. Just curious, that's all. Although you're bound to attract attention when you're out." I glanced down at the red skirt and found myself agreeing with the remark. And had I not already flirted in the disco? As we got out the car, she finished what she was saying. "You just keep up the good work, Sally, and you'll have no trouble convincing the world that you are a fully functional female. Now let's go shopping." We came out of the car park and entered the large shopping center. This was my first girls' shopping trip, and Georgie was determined that I was going to enjoy it. Our first stop was the large branch of Debenham's department store. I had visited it before, but only to look, never to buy. We headed straight to the second floor, where many of the other high street chains had small concessions. Georgie stopped at a rail and lifted a dress. "How about this?" she said, holding it up for me. I took the dress and shook my head. To me it looked too tardy, and I told her so. She put it back and fished about the rail for other dresses and motioned for me to do the same. Putting my handbag over my shoulder, I started browsing the clothes rails, lifting the occasional item for a closer inspection when something did catch my eye. When we moved into the next concession, Georgie insisted I go and try on a glamorous evening gown. It was full length with a ruffled hem and lacy bodice. The delicate spaghetti straps ran down the cutaway back. I had never before worn such a dress, and I said my skirt was difficult to put on, let alone take off. But she insisted I go and put it on, and I headed to the changing rooms with her in close attendance. After a minor struggle, I managed to get down to my underwear and then slipped the dress over my head. It felt light and very expensive as I straightened out the straps. I stepped out of the cubicle and Georgie let out a gasp of approval. "Oh my, that is just you, Sally." When I turned, the hem swirled round with me, and I had to admit the dress felt fabulous. The price tag was £250, and I wondered if Georgie was considering buy it for me. She must have realized my thoughts, and I was a little disappointed when she shook her head and said, "Sorry, Sally. Today we're trying not buying." I nodded and went back to change out of the gown. This disappointment would be repeated more than once on this shopping trip. As we made our way through the store, we each tried on several items. Some looked good, others looked awful. Georgie was happy to see that I was really enjoying the fun of trying on clothes, even if we didn't buy anything. It was just as much fun when we visited the shoe stores. I watched attentively as young women tried shoes on me. I hoped when I returned to work I was as professional as some of the girls helping me now. Georgie would nod or shake her head as I stepped out in a variety of styles. I became aware that she only ever nodded when I was teetering around in enormous heels. Whenever I tried on sensible shoes, she simply shook her head. She took me to the designer shops too. Outside some, they had a concierge who was there to limit who did or did not get into the store. I paused outside, wondering if we would be allowed in. Georgie whispered in my ear, "Sally, that skirt you're wearing cost over £400, and so did the rest of your outfit. If anyone's getting in here, it's us." We strolled past the doorman and entered the shop. With the exception of a young lady, we were the only other customers in the store. The other customer noticed my skirt and she smiled at me in approval. "That's a Louis Vuitton, isn't it?" she inquired. I nodded as she came over for a closer look. I had heard the name before and knew most young women would covet such designer clothes. I'd die for a skirt like that. "What's it like to wear?" "Being rubber, I mean." I smoothed a hand down the skirt and said, "It's a dream." She nodded and added, "You'd normally run a mile from something rubber, wouldn't you? But that is quality." "You are so lucky." I thanked her, and she went back to the dress she was looking at. Georgie motioned me over to where she was browsing, and I stepped carefully across the highly polished floor to join her. The dress she was looking at on the mannequin was a terrific sundress/afternoon dress in heavy gray cotton with pink floral and rhinestone appliques. It had a fitted, square neck and a side metal zipper on the full skirt. A price tag told me it was £1,000, and when I felt the material I realized why. As I changed into the dress, I took special care not to damage it in any way, but thankfully the zip was on the side, and I had no problem doing myself up. I stepped out of the changing room and twirled round to see the full effect of the skirt. Georgie nodded her approval too. I wanted that dress so much but knew it was way above our budget. Reluctantly, I asked Georgie to help me take it off. As she ushered me back to the changing area, she whispered, "One day." I put the dress back on the rail and wondered how many other girls had tried it on and longed to take it home with them. After a break for coffee, Georgie said we should head to one of the makeup counters that offered free makeovers. Although I looked fine, but she said it would be helpful to get an independent assessment of what my coloring was. We made our way along the rows of shops, then Georgie stopped and dragged me into a small jewelry store. "Come on, let's get those ears of yours pierced," she exclaimed as we entered the shop. The shop assistant was more than happy to go to work on me with her piercing gun. I sat down and waited for the pain that I was sure would accompany the procedure. Georgie went off to find me some new earrings as the first shock of pain hit my left ear. The second pull of the gun was equally sore, but then it was over. When Georgie returned, she paid for both the piercing and the 2 sets of earrings she had chosen. As I got to my feet, she inserted a pair of gold hoop earrings into my ears. I was thankful that the hoops were on the small side and thanked her for the gift. The second pair was given to me and I popped them in my handbag as Georgie headed towards the makeup department of Boots. There had always been something intimidating about makeup departments. Everything was white, even the uniforms worn by the assistants. I had ventured into such places before but was too terrified to even stop and look at any product displays. This time was different. We looked at the various ranges, stopping to try a lipstick or a foundation. Georgie took me over to one of the counters where they had sales assistants. I noted that she had an enormous amount of makeup and some considerable fake tan. Georgie selected a lipstick from the display and opened it up to test some of it on the back of her index finger. She looked at me and said, "When trying a new lipstick, Sally, use the inside of your finger rather than the back of your hand. Most women make that mistake, then wonder why the shade they've just bought isn't what they expected." She applied a small amount of the tester lipstick on my finger, then held it up for the sales assistant to see. "Do you think this shade will suit my friend here?" she asked. The sales assistant looked at the bright lilac color and shook her head before speaking. "No, it's too pale. She'd be much better with a slightly lighter shade. In fact, the one she's wearing just now looks fine." I felt a little elated that my personal choice of lip color had met the approval of a total stranger. But I knew Georgie was showing me how a woman would try out new makeup in a department store situation. She continued to ask the sales assistant for alternatives. "Yes, it's fine, but you must have something a little more exciting," she said. The assistant nodded, then selected another lipstick, a deeper purple shade, and opened it up for me to try. I put it on the inside of my finger and held it up to the light for them to see. Georgie did not seem convinced and shook her head. I put the lipstick back on the display and the staff assistant came out from behind the counter to try another color. I watched as she looked at me, then back to the product ranges. She selected another lipstick and asked, "Do you normally wear such light shades?" she asked, referring to the almost nude gloss I had chosen for my look that morning. It was Georgie who spoke for me. She normally likes rich reds and deep berry shades, but I've told her to try something less dramatic, especially for daytime. I nodded as the assistant handed me a tissue and asked if I would mind wiping off the color I was currently wearing. I took the tissue and removed what I could of the lipstick, then turned to face her as she approached with a very pale lilac shade, which she said was called Luscious. It certainly looked incredibly inviting. Please subscribe for the next part and visit my Patreon page for early access.